release conditions. The only judge that can do that is the judge presiding over your criminal case. Now, when your case is called, I'm going to ask that you come forward. If you have witnesses, they must come forward at this time. All witnesses and parties must be sworn. The petitioner will first present their case, and the respondent may, if they choose, cross-examine the petitioner and the petitioner's witnesses. If there is sufficient evidence, we will go forward, and then the respondent will have an opportunity to testify and present evidence, and the petitioner will have an opportunity to cross-examine the witnesses of the respondents. If the petitioner does not appear today, the case will be dismissed. If the respondent does not appear today because they have not had service of process, in other words, there has not been sufficient time to serve the respondent, I will continue the case for service. We cannot go forward until service of process has been made. This court has no jurisdiction to hear the case until the respondent has been served. We do have today some motions to dissolve. I will hear and take up those matters first. If I do issue an injunction, as I said, all parties must become familiar with the terms and conditions of the injunction. Federal and state law prohibits the respondent from owning or possessing any firearms or ammunition if an injunction has been granted. All right, I'm going to call roll. Is Anthony Sterling present? All right. Madam Clerk, in case number 13DR, all right, is Austin Landgraf present? Come forward, sir. I'm going to have Jane prepare these orders. Okay. Sir, just come forward. You filed a motion to dissolve this petition?
Yes.
I should say final judgment. And is Gabrielle, is it Jacinto?
Yeah, she's outside.
With the child?
Yes.
Okay. Have you had any contact with Anthony Sterling? No. Okay. Tell the court why you're seeking. It was filed in 2013.
Well, for Gabrielle, she can't go to SSC to get her education. She was.
I'm talking, but you're Austin, right?
Yes.
Just for you. Just for you.
For me. I have a family now. I have children. I've grown up. I'm a better man now. I mean, that happened years ago. I don't see this affecting like jobs and everything.
Sir, have you had any contact with the petitioner? When's the last time you had contact with the petitioner?
Probably the last time
we were in court?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's been a while. That's why I filed.
What do you do for a living?
Right now I'm at a adhesive manufacturing joint, and I'm in production right now.
And how old were you? How old were you at the time when the final judgment was in it?
20.
2013.
2013, 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
18.
18?
18, yeah.
All right.
I had two children.
You have 2 children now?
Yeah.
All right. Well, that'll change it.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and grant your motion. You'll get your paperwork in the mail. Make sure that your address is correct, Mr. Landgraf,
Yes.
in the file. All right. Is it correct in the file?
Yeah.
Okay. Then you're going to go ahead and get your order in the mail.
Excellent.
All right. Thank you.
As well as Gabrielle's too?
Well, no, she has a child, right?
Yes.
I'm going to ask that she come in at this time.
Okay.
Can you bring her? Can you have her come in, and then you take care of the child? Do you know the child? Is Kimberly Kent present? Kimberly Kent? All right, I'm going to go ahead, Madam Clerk, and dismiss case 18 DR 966. Is Jessica Musgrove present? Jessica Musgrove?
I sent her next door.
Did you? Oh, you sent them next door? Okay.
Yeah, number 4 and 5.
You sent next door? Okay. All right. Ma'am, come forward, please. You just come to the podium. You filed a motion to dissolve a final judgment of protection in case number 13 DR 4977. What is your name?
Gabrielle Jacinto.
All right. And why are you seeking to dissolve the injunction?
Mainly because since I have 2 kids now, I really just want to set the best example that I can, and I can't do that with this. You know, I'd kind of be hypocritical. So.
Okay, and you have had no contact with the petitioner in the case. Is that correct? All right. When was the last time that you contacted or had any contact with the petitioner?
At the last hearing that I was at.
In 2013?
Yes.
Okay, that was 5 years ago?
Yes.
All right. And are you married to Mr. Landgraf?
No.
But you share children together?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. How old were you when this final judgment was entered? How
17, I think.
how old are you now?
Oh, 22.
22?
Yes.
All right, I am going to grant your motion. You're going to get your paperwork in the mail. Just make sure the address is correct that you have in the court file.
Okay.
Thank you. Right. Diana Rodriguez?
Yep.
Yes. Come forward. Okay. Is Mr. Walter Terry present? No. Okay. Well, Mr. Terry filed a motion to dissolve the final judgment, and you have been noticed. Do you have an objection?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Well, I'm going to deny it at this time. Of course, the law allows him to file at any time. So always make sure that you have the correct address in the court file. But I'm going to deny because he's failed to appear. I'm going to deny his motion to dissolve. You'll be getting your paperwork in the mail. Make sure that you have your correct address in the court file.
Thank you.
All right. Tate Bloomquist and Jose Costello, I'm going to send you down to courtroom 4D. Are you Miss Bloomquist? All right, and where's Mr. Costello? Mr. Costello, if you and your witnesses will please go down to courtroom 4D with Judge Schott. Okay. And Alice Perkins, and Dorothy Moore, I'm going to ask that you please, ladies, please go down to courtroom 4D with your witnesses. And would you let Judge Schott know which one's in the case? Yes. Hey, baby, did Kimberly Kent ever show up?
No.
She never did?
Nope. The only time both parties, number 5, they both showed up, but Musgrove showed up for number 4, but not Ken.
Okay. All right. Okay, we're going to go ahead and call Dennis Warren versus George Zimmerman. All right, all parties regarding the case of Dennis Warren versus George Zimmerman, please come forward. If you have any witnesses, they need to be called forward at this time.
Is there for petitioner, you're kind of on the side, Your
It
Honor?
makes no difference.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor. Dennis Warren.
Do you have witnesses?
Yes, it's Detective Harris also.
All right, I'm going to invoke the rule of sequestration. You need to remain outside, sir. Unless you're going to call him first.
No, Your Honor.
No? Okay. All right, you may have a seat, gentlemen. You were outside when I went over the colloquy. Do you need me to go over it again?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Okay, a petition has been filed on behalf of Dennis Warren. It was filed on March 16, 2018, a petition for protection against repeat violence. Mr. Warren, please state your full name.
Dennis Albert Warren.
I'd like for you to stand and raise your right hand to be sworn, sir.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
You may remain seated, and you may remain seated at the council table as long as I can hear you.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Mr. Warren, do you swear and affirm the allegations in the petition are true and correct?
Yes, I do.
And for the record, sir, what is your name, counsel?
Your Honor, Jason Breslin on behalf of Mr. Warren.
Jason who?
Breslin, B-R-E-S-L-I-N.
All right, Mr. Brasness, just please speak up so that I can hear you.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, the record indicates that Mr. Zimmerman was served on May 3rd at 9 a.m. All right, and he is not present. All right, you wish to go forward?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. You may proceed.
Your Honor, at this time, the petitioner calls the Dennis Warren petitioner.
All right, you may, again, sir, you may remain seated and testify from council table as long as I can hear you.
Okay.
Do you wish to inquire?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right.
May I move to the podium, Your Honor?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Good afternoon, Mr. Warren.
Good afternoon.
Could you please state your full name?
Dennis Albert Warren.
Mr. Warren, without getting your specific address, what county do you live in?
Seminole.
How long have you lived in Seminole County?
28 years, approximately.
What's your current occupation?
Private investigator.
You're a licensed private investigator?
Yes.
And how long have you been a licensed private investigator?
5 years.
And prior to becoming an investigator, what did you do for an occupation?
I worked for 30 years in Orange County Corrections.
Did you have a title?
I retired as the captain over internal affairs.
Was your entire career spent at the Orange County Jail?
I started in 1983 under the sheriff. The jail transferred in 1987 to the county commission, and I had a choice to stay with the sheriff or the jail, and I stayed with the jail.
In the fall of 2017, did you begin working on a project as a private investigator?
I did.
And can you tell the court the nature of that project that you were working on?
Yes, I was contacted by a production company out of New York, spoke with the producer who described a large production that they were going to be making, and asked if I wanted to participate as a private investigator for them. It was a production on the events surrounding the Trayvon Martin shooting, and the number of events and history surrounding that particular event.
No, when you said contacted to get involved in this. Was that as an actor? Was that as some type of person that was going to be part of the documentary in and of itself?
No, I originally was going to be their private investigator and was given a lot of information that they wanted. A lot of people to be contacted, many people. And eventually, over the course of time, over the next few months, they interviewed me a couple times. So I was their private investigator to get information, but it's my understanding I may be in 1 or 2 episodes.
Do you have any royalty benefits? Do you have any financial gain from either the success, non-success, anything on how that documentary goes?
No, I don't.
Were you paid an hourly fee?
I was.
You said you contacted multiple people. How many times would you contact a person to ask if they want to be involved in this documentary? And before, did you wait for them to contact you back after you made initial contact?
It was all different. Some people I would contact directly and face-to-face. Some I would leave a message. Bottom line is, once they said no, then I thanked them for their time and moved on to my next person. I had dozens of people.
One of the people that you contacted, a person by the name of George Michael Zimmerman.
I attempted to contact Mr. Zimmerman.
How many times did you attempt to contact Mr. Zimmerman?
I sent him on the same date. I left him a voicemail telling him that a little bit of background, and this is a possible financial opportunity. That was the instructions I had to let him know.
I'm sorry, you said there was a financial opportunity.
Yes, ma'am. The production company wanted me to ask him if he wanted to participate, and it was a possible financial opportunity for him. I think they wanted to pay him. They paid a few people, in my understanding. I wasn't involved in the payment process, but that's what I got from that conversation. So I left an email. I had obtained an email address and a phone number that I was pretty sure was good. So I left one of each, a voicemail, a text, an email, and I had a P.O. box that I was 99% certain was his P.O. box. And I believe I sent my business card with a short explanation on the back, and that was it.
Your business card had your email address on it?
Yes, it did.
Did it also have your phone number?
Yes, it did.
And that was in September of 2017?
Yes. I think it was the 21st, but I'm not positive.
Did you ever have any other contact after that point with Mr. Zimmerman?
Not until December 16th, I think, when he started. I never reached out to him again. But I believe it was December 16th. December 14th or 15th, the producer called me and said...
Are we going to... I don't allow hearsay.
Okay. I'll apologize, Your Honor.
All right.
December 16th, I got contacts from him, one-way contacts.
Okay. You had direct contacts from Mr. Zimmerman?
He was calling my phone, leaving me voicemails, texting me, and leaving me emails.
On December 16th, you initially started getting these messages from Mr. Zimmerman, correct?
Correct.
How did you know it was Mr. Zimmerman?
His name, when I had plugged in his number in my phone, the first time I reached out and left that message, I had put his name on it, and it lit up, and I saw it was there. And his email address on the emails, it was his email address that it was being sent from.
Did you do anything at that point?
I contacted the sheriff's office.
How long after you began contacting you did you contact the sheriff's office?
Same day, I believe it was a Saturday.
When we're talking about number of time that on the 16th he contacted you, do you know the approximate number of times that he contacted you that day?
It was a lot. I have it in my notes. I don't know, altogether with everything, 40, 50, 60. It was a lot. It was repeated over and over.
After you contacted the sheriff's office, what did you do next on December 16, 2017?
I just, I don't remember specifically what I did. I did not answer any of the calls. I just, at some point, I don't remember if it was that same day or the next day, but the detective that was assigned to the case told me at some point. Okay. I'm not sure if what I did.
Without the detective, did you at some point make a single contact from your device to Mr. Zimmerman?
Electronically, yes.
What was the contents of that message that you sent Mr. Zimmerman?
Something close to, please stop all unwarranted contacts or unwanted contacts by any means, text, voicemail, email, or personally, or I would contact law enforcement, or I pursue charges, I think I said.
Did you get a response?
Yes. 18 minutes later, response was no, in quotes, I believe.
How was that sent to you?
Email. Email? I think it was email. Yes, it was email.
He indicated that you didn't answer his phone calls. Did you have any voicemails?
A lot.
Okay. What was the nature of those voicemails?
They were all different. I didn't feel that there was a live person speaking on any. There was some.
I'm sorry, you didn't feel like there was a
It was
live person?
a live person speaking. There was some verbal communications that sounded to be recordings of movies. It sounded like haunted movies or something. What I clearly remember, and it was hard to discern those words, so I don't know what that was, but what I did discern was there was one of the recordings was police communications on police radios you could hear. Another one was sirens, rapid sirens, the American police sirens, and then the European type sirens. He sent me many times this ticking noise. It would be tick tock, and it starts speeding up, tick tock, like right before, like a sound effect in a haunted movie, if you will. There was what I call the child's jewelry box. It sounded like a jewelry box being played that you would see in some of these types of movies. There was one in particular that sounded like a recording from maybe a movie where there was a man that was just screaming in pain, it sounded like, and all of a sudden it went silent, and then a few seconds later a church choir started singing. Trying to remember the rest. They were all unusual.
You know, the emails and the texts that you received from him, did they have actual words that you could understand in those messages?
Yes.
Did he accuse you of things that you're not?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Did he accuse you of things that you're not? By way of example, did Mr. Zimmerman call you a pedophile in one of the emails?
Yes.
Did Mr. Zimmerman send you a message that said, you're in the private sector now, expletive?
Yes. Yes.
Did he ask you to answer your phone if you're a man?
Yes, several times.
Did he tell you to stop expletive with my parents?
Yes.
Did you ever speak with his parents?
Never met them, don't know where they are, never made contact with them.
Did he leave you any messages about your voicemail being full?
Over and over. Yes.
And did those essentially say your voicemail's full?
Yes.
Let me ask you the question, why was your voicemail full?
Because he continuously filled it.
Did he ask you if you were too scared to answer the phone?
Yes.
At one point in December, around Christmas time, did he send you the following text message? Dennis, I'm concerned. On the phone you mentioned jihad. Why do you want to take a bomb on an American airliner from Florida to New York on Christmas? Did he send you that message?
Right after I got back from New York, yes.
Wait a minute, you were in New York?
I was in New York 12th. We took like a 4-day vacation up there. So the 11th, 12th to like the 14th, I believe.
How'd you get there? Did you drive?
No, we flew.
Did you have any particular concern about that particular message?
Well, yes. How did he know I was in New York? I don't do Facebook. Limited people knew I was in New York, as well as I thought one of the intents behind it was try to flag my name. I figured he might be sending that somewhere to flag my name if I try to get on an airplane again to detain me or something.
Did he send a message that said, text me again, I'll show up at your home, you expletive?
Yes, he sent that right after I sent him that one text asking him to stop communications. He said no, and then he followed up with that one.
Did he send you a message, another message in reference to, you're a pedophile, Jay-Z's an expletive, so let's tell Carlos Sims to call me, otherwise I'll see you before you realize it.
Yes.
Let me ask you a question. He referenced Jay-Z, music performer, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Is there any relevance on why you would have Jay-Z's name in the text message to you?
It's my understanding that Jay-Z is the money behind the production. I don't know Jay-Z, never met him, but that's my understanding.
So the messages to you started on December 16, 2017.
The direct messages to me, yes.
When did they stop?
Christmas Day, I got the last barrage of them, I guess. I forgot how many, but Christmas Day was the last. And noontime, I think.
There's a couple questions about your law enforcement. Anybody that's involved in law enforcement, state attorneys, public defenders, anybody that's involved in that process has a right to have, within property appraisers and their licensed vendors, have a right to have them be confidential.
Right.
And of course, you're free to exercise that right.
Yes, as soon as that statute came out many years ago.
Is that the limit to what you do with your address?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Is that the limit that you did under that statute, was go to the tag agency and go to the property appraiser's office?
I sent forms in and, yes, had those redacted in my address.
When this started beginning in this 9-day period that we're talking about, did you do anything else with the, what I'll call masking of your personal contact information?
I did. Through my career as a private investigator over the last several years, I've realized there are many more places where your information can be found with a little effort. And I spent a lot of time, hours, having information redacted from a number of different sources that could be publicly obtained.
Did you do anything to your house different as far as the security system?
I did. I immediately upgraded all the cameras, had my system looked at, put spotlights, sensor motion spotlights on my house. I have 16 spotlights that are on at a low light level, and then they really flash with a sensor if somebody walks in front of them. I have 2 8-year-old twins. I don't let them play out in the front yard anymore unless I'm there armed. They don't know what's going on at this point. I let my next door neighbor, gave her a picture of the vehicle Mr. Zimmerman drives and the tag number, asked her to keep an eye out for it. She had told me she had already seen it in the neighborhood before. She hasn't seen it since then. I didn't tell her the name. I didn't want her to get too concerned. I still haven't told her the name, but I'm sure she knows now. I have rearranged my locked boxes where I keep my weapons. I'll leave it at that, just closer to points of entry of my house. As far as my house, I think that's all I've done.
Did you make any additional requests from the Seminole County Sheriff's Office?
Yes, I've been providing extra patrols since I met with the detective in December.
Mr. Warren, you're 30 years in corrections.
Yes, sir.
Did you ever feel the need to do any of the stuff that you outlined before just now?
No.
As a private investigator, have you ever been threatened?
Yes.
As a private investigator, have you ever gone to serve papers, letters, court documents, and had the individual you were trying to serve flash it, show you a gun?
Twice, as recently as 2 weeks ago.
And just to be fair, that incident 2 weeks ago had nothing to do with what we're here today.
No, sir. No.
But in the course of your career, 30 years in the corrections, approximately 6 years as a private investigator, having a gun flash at you, did you ever feel the need to go to these extra measures that you did in this particular case?
No, but let me also say it's alarming. It's worrisome when that happens, but no, neither one of those caused me to take this level of measures of security.
Why did you take the measures of security?
Because I'm very concerned for myself and my family in regards to the threats that I've received and the history as I've got to know this individual.
It's a history.
Yes.
We're not here to retry opinionate about his history, but does that history have an effect on how you feel?
Absolutely.
And can you explain that to the court?
Well, I can. I've talked with many people. I've got to know Mr. Zimmerman from behind the scenes better than most anybody, probably. I've spoken with all of his girlfriends post the Trayvon shooting.
I don't want to go into very specifics about what these people told you, but I want you to tell the court how, knowing his background, knowing the public cases that have been out there, how that has had an impact on the text messages, the voicemails, the emails that he's sending you.
The people that know him very well are very scared of him. They've described somebody that would make me very concerned for my safety, and does. Of those people, he's been involved in at least 2 felony arrests for violence, at least 2 violence injunctions, all separate, all 4 being separate. I've talked with other people that have been in altercations with him in bars while he's wearing a weapon. They were concerned as well. I've talked to a lot of people and found a lot of records.
During the course of your investigation, your work as a private investigator in this case, did you read any of his public statements that he's made?
I'm sorry, what was the
I
question?
said, in the course of your investigation, have you read about any of the public statements that Mr. Zimmerman has made?
One in particular that I recall recently. It was, he sent it to me. During all the emails and threats to me, he sent me a hyperlink of an interview that he had just conducted that morning to a national media outlet called The Blast, in which he was referring to me, and they had just published it that morning. He then sends me the hyperlink to read it, and it said, I've learned how to deal, something to the effect, I've learned how to deal with people like him. I learned that back in February of 2012.
February 2012, related to Mr. Zimmerman, ring a bell to you?
February 26, 2012 was when he shot the 17-year-old unarmed person.
Are you ready to take all these precautions, take your security system down?
No.
Are you ready to call the Seminole County Sheriff's Office and have them stop doing patrols in your neighborhood?
No.
Has Mr. Zimmerman ever made any statements to you, public statements, that he's going to stop?
No.
The fact that you haven't heard any direct messages since December 25th, 2017, does that alleviate your fears?
Not at all. I blocked his ability to electronically communicate with me.
You've made changes to your life?
Yes.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
I apologize, yeah. So you have made changes to your life?
Yes, sir.
Do you anticipate continuing with these changes for at least the near future?
Yes.
You're a private investigator, correct?
Correct.
Does it do you any benefit in your course of business to have your name publicly out there?
No.
You had to hire you felt the need to hire an attorney to represent you today, correct?
Yes.
Not getting into any details, I'm not free, am I?
No.
The communications, the repeated communications, did they cause you duress?
Yes.
Did they put you in fear?
Me and my family, yes.
And you don't anticipate that? Do you know when that fear will go away?
No.
Let me ask you a question. Let me just relate this hearing specifically. You filed this petition in March of 2018, correct?
Correct.
Is there a reason why you waited 4 months to file the petition for an injunction in this case?
There is. I wanted to file it the day I met with Detective Harris. We talked about the specifics of the case and the injunction process. Now they're two different things. And upon recognizing that the injunction process is a process where the respondent must be served before anything further happens, and we did not know where he was, I made a decision. I felt it was best to wait to what appeared to be imminent charges forthcoming on the criminal end, which we thought was going to be a felony arrest or a warrant issued, and then immediately file the injunction where he could be served at the same time. Unbeknownst to me, that process took a while for a number of investigative reasons that Detective Harris didn't foresee, nor I. So we continued the police patrols, and I waited until the criminal charges were filed. As a matter of fact, in my injunction, you'll see I put in there that criminal charges have been initiated the day I filed it. I got the call on, it was a Thursday, I went down Friday, and then there was another delay, which I won't, they told me that it was going to be a little bit further. So it was all lined up to make it where he could be served. Otherwise, the injunction information would have possibly got out in the public, been released, let the respondent know. He could have manipulated the system and avoided service. So unfortunately, it took a while to finally get the injunction served. My concerns have only been elevated every day since.
You don't have any control whether or not this documentary gets produced and actually comes.
Nope.
Sorry, what was your question?
You have no control over whether or not this documentary goes forward and actually gets produced and gets published to the public sector, do you?
I do not. There was one other email, if I may, that concerned me, that he said in the midst of these other emails, somebody needs to warn Mrs. Warren because I'm coming over and bringing hell with me.
Let me just. Thank you, Mr. Warren, and I have no further questions. Did you count up the total number of telephone calls to you to be 55 telephone calls over a 9-day period?
How many periods, Dave?
9 days.
That sounds right.
Did you count up 67 text messages over a 9-day period?
That sounds right.
Did you count 36 recorded voicemails over a 9-day period?
That sounds right.
27 emails.
That sounds right. I think 185 was the total. Like this morning, I just recounted, but I think those are the numbers.
So in a 9-day period, Mr. Zimmerman contacted you 185 times.
Correct.
With many of those being threats of violence to your person?
Yes.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
With many of those communications being threats of violence to your person?
Your answer is
I
yes?
took them as threats.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
I have some questions. What was the threats to your family? You said that you were in fear for your family?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell the court why?
Warren, Mrs. Warren, I'm coming and I'm bringing hell with me.
So you took that as a threat to Mrs. Warren?
To myself and my family. That's how I took it. Yes, ma'am.
All right. And have you had any contact with Mr. Zimmerman since you filed the petition?
I have not.
So the last contact you had with him was Christmas?
He has contacted me. Yes, ma'am. The only contact I had going to him was September.
Well, no, you testified just a moment ago.
You're right. I asked him to stop. I apologize. I
Okay.
did send that to him.
So when did you ask him to stop?
I have the date in here.
Was
It was right after Detective Harris told me to send that to him.
Well, why didn't you block his phone calls and his emails when he started sending these to you?
I tried. I had to finally contact AOL. I shared this with Detective Harris, but and then I finally got my.
You couldn't block your phone?
I'm sorry?
Your phone.
Yes.
You don't have that device on your phone that says block caller?
But I could block the caller, but then he would still leave voicemails. It would go to a voicemail, just wouldn't ring on my phone.
You don't have a device on your phone that just completely disallows that at all? And you couldn't block his email? That's your testimony?
Yeah, I called, yes, for the one, I called T-Mobile, and they told me that, and I told them I'm trying to block it. They told me, and I said, but I'm still getting voicemails. They finally elevated me to somebody who was a supervisor or something. He told me, you will still get the voicemails. It'll just block from the ringer going and showing you, but it will still route block calls to your voicemail.
And so the last time that he contacted you was December 25th.
Yes, ma'am.
Since he was served on May 3rd, he has not contacted you?
No.
So there's been no contact since December 23rd, correct?
I believe so, yes.
All right. You contacted the police. You said, when did you contact the police? What was the date at which you contacted the police?
I believe it was December 16th.
So right after you got the phone calls? Okay.
Yes.
And they told you not to go out and get a restraining order?
They didn't tell me. We talked about the process and that they did not know where he was at. And they didn't tell me not to get one, but he would not be able to be served until they could find out where he was located. And, through the process, I thought it would not be wise to put this out in the public. I was very concerned with this getting out in the public.
Because why?
Because, well, as far as restraining orders go, because it would alert him and he would possibly avoid service until I'm not real familiar with the system. The system, I think, would set a hearing, and then if he doesn't show and set a hearing to some point where it's just dismissed. And I was worried that he might manipulate the system so to avoid being held responsible for the injunction, or the injunction request, Your Honor.
And this period, this one period that you've testified to happened between December 16th and December 25th.
Yes, ma'am.
And you testified that there was approximately 181 incidences while he reached out to you?
I think it was 185. I added.
85?
Yes, ma'am. I think I added
okay. And did the bulk of those happen on December 16th, or were they just sporadic, or were they mostly on December 16th and then one on December 15th, or 25th? Or how did that?
On December 16th, I got 35 calls. On December 17th, I got 6 calls. December 19th, I got 4 calls. And the voicemails, it looks like December 7th. Voicemails, December 16th. There was a number of them. I wrote the times. I didn't put the amount. There was more on the 17th, more on the 19th. And then on December 25th, I got 5 more, which I must have, at that point, I had his number blocked because I don't show a calls for that. I just show voicemails.
So 5.
Yes, ma'am.
And these were all just, as you testified, just random different types of noise in the background. Not all of them had voices on it, correct?
No, they were the voices or what I consider sound effects.
Sound effects?
Yes.
Okay. Questions regarding the follow-up?
And it just might have been my hearing, Your Honor, but I just want to make sure it's clear. The communications went to Christmas, December 25th. I thought I heard December 21st from the court. I just want to make sure.
I think he testified the last communication he had was December 25th.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, sure. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right. Do you have any other witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, I'd call Detective Harris.
And what is he going to testify to?
Detective Harris can testify to 2 things. One is he's going to testify to his communications with the identity that it was Mr. Zimmerman on the other side of the phone.
Was that in dispute?
It's not in dispute, Your Honor. And the second thing he would talk to is the rationale on whether or not on why they waited from December 25th. The whole issue on waiting on the injunction for waiting on the criminal charges.
He's going to testify as to why Mr. Warren waited so long to get an injunction?
He's going to testify to his conversations with Mr. Warren, where they discussed the process, where they discussed that it would not be necessarily in the best interest of the criminal case to have him served, and that it would also expose him prior to criminal charges being filed by having that served on him at that point. He did not direct Mr. Warren not to file an injunction, Your Honor. However, he did have the upside downside, as I'll call, conversation with Mr. Warren on the reasoning why Mr. Warren did. If the court has any concern that Mr. Warren waited this time because he was not in fear for any other purpose.
Well, yeah, I think you better bring it because that's a big concern.
Thank you, Your Honor. This I'll call Detective Harris.
All right, Mr. Harris, Detective Harris. Huh? Go ahead. Yeah, put him in witnessing because I can't hear that guy. Sir, have you been sworn? Please raise your right hand to be sworn.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God.
Just so you're aware, I'm coming over laryngitis, so my voice is
Oh,
strained.
okay. Well, you need some water. Do you need water, sir?
Did you need water?
Did you need water?
I should be fine. I'm just letting you know my voice is strained. So,
You may inquire.
Detective, could you state your name for the record, please?
Clifford Dwayne Harris,
Where are you employed?
Seminole County.
We're here on an injunction related to communications between George Michael Zimmerman to Dennis Albert Warren. What was your involvement in this matter?
I was contacted on the 16th. The case was forwarded to me for the investigation. I was the primary investigator.
What was your understanding of what was going on?
That Mr. Warren was receiving contact that was unwanted and repetitive in nature by Mr. Zimmerman.
Did you give any suggestions on December 16th for Mr. Warren to do any specific actions at that time?
Yes, I did. That day when he contacted me, he had stated that he was receiving repetitive calls, text messages, and so I started to have dialogue with him During that time, they continued and were continuing. So I requested that he send a notice that we pretty much build on every harassing case, or just to establish that contact was unwanted. So I asked him if he would send a written text back stating that he was requesting that all communication cease, and that if it didn't, he'd be pursuing and following through with law enforcement for charges.
To your knowledge, in your investigation, did the communication stop?
No, immediately in response to that, Mr. Warren continued to receive statements, I guess, acknowledging that the request was made, but they continued.
Did you ever reach out to Mr. Zimmerman in the course of the investigation?
On January 3rd, so there was a process of time where we were securing and working through to get information from Mr. Warren's device to ensure the contact was one-sided. So upon completing some of our preliminary checks and getting information, we did reach out. Myself and Sergeant Seipel from my unit placed a phone call, and I was privy to that phone call, and that was on January 3rd.
And by privy, you mean present at that?
Yes, I was.
Prior to this, had you ever spoken with Mr. Zimmerman?
I had not.
Okay. And I'm going to mispronounce the other detective you were with.
Seipel, Sergeant Seipel.
By the way, was there any question that it was Mr. Zimmerman on the other line?
No, when she identified herself, he immediately began to rant, was calling her direct names. He referenced knowing her. She said, well, maybe you don't know who you're speaking, because she had had previous contact in helping him. He began to give a disclosure of some content, letting her know that it was in fact him. He had mentioned her involvement in his previous investigations. At that time, we had mentioned, or she had mentioned, Mr. Warren's name to let him know the reason of the call. And he began to give statements to the fact that he was upset that Mr. Warren had contacted his uncle and continued to just use profanities and berate her.
Did he deny making the contacts, Mr. Warren?
He spoke to the fact of, no, he spoke to the fact of why he was upset. And then, like I said, he just continued to rant. And finally the phone call concluded, and then he made some other calls to our agency.
Did you ultimately, again, in the context, did you ultimately file a probable cause affidavit to bring criminal charges against Mr. Zimmerman?
Yes, I did.
Did Mr. Warren ever indicate to you that he thought that he should probably get an injunction against Mr. Zimmerman?
From the very beginning, I mean, he had mentioned his concerns. We had talked about different things that we could do to increase his personal safety. We had put some measures in place for extra patrol and trying to assist him. He stayed vocal about his concerns throughout the process about working towards the injunction. We just covered and discussed some of the aspects of information being released, but we were trying to work as quick as we could.
I understand. I'm not questioning you guys did, the speed at which you did your investigation, but you did discuss that once the civil injunction would be filed, that much of this information may become public, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Did you discuss the fact that it potentially could have a negative impact on the criminal case as far as serving Mr. Zimmerman with, at a later point with whatever?
Yes, we did.
So although you didn't instruct Mr. Zimmerman not to file an injunction until a certain date, you did discuss the upside downsides of the timing of the injunction versus the criminal charge.
To Mr. Warren, yes.
I apologize.
Yes. No.
You discussed the upside downsides with Mr. Warren of filing it.
Yes, and that's why, like I mentioned, during those time frames, we were trying to increase patrol. We talked about personal safety measures for him and his family, awareness, and things that he could do as well.
Did Mr. Warren, as far as he indicated to you, did his fears lessen over that time period?
You said what?
Did his fears lessen over that time period?
No, he's been in constant contact with me for some of the concerns, and so we voiced that. Like I said, we've tried to keep certain measures in place to assist him, but he's been vocal throughout the process.
Those measures still in place?
Yes, they are.
Is it the Prior to putting measures in place for somebody, you have to find that it's what you believe to be and what the sheriff's office believes to be a credible threat.
Yeah, I mean, we have to, it has to be warranted. We have to at least have some understanding that there's certain concerns that are present that would validate us allocating resources.
Those concerns are still present as far as the sheriff's office is concerned.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions.
You may sit down. Thank you.
Am I excused or allowed to remain?
Did you wish? Is he subject to recall? I don't think so.
I'm not going to recall him here.
Yeah, I think you can remain. Do you have any other witnesses, sir?
No, ma'am.
Well, the petitioner bears the burden in this case by substantial evidence. You wish to argue your case? Competent and substantial evidence so that the court should issue a permanent injunction or an injunction, a final injunction for a certain period of time. It's your burden to prove that it's necessary in this case. The respondent's not here. He's not going to go forward, so you can go ahead and argue your position.
Thank you, Your Honor.
The petition has been filed for repeat violence, correct?
Your Honor, and I filed just to clarify that.
Could you hold on just one moment? I'm going to send another case, because we're backed up here. I'm going to send another case down to Judge Her. Is Tiffany Cath present? Yes. All right. And James Tate? Is Mr. Tate present? All right. Russell Tate? All right. I'm going to have you go down to courtroom 4C. All right. And Judge Her will hear your case. Sorry about that. Okay, go ahead.
Your Honor, originally, Mr. Warren filed the injunction under the repeat. Yes, under the repeat violence injunction statute, based on the form that he was given when he went down to the clerk and sought assistance as a pro se litigant at that time. He contacted my office at that time. We agreed to represent him at the hearing today. I did file a memorandum that was filed on Friday, and I think it never got to you, but we had delivered one to your chambers. I don't know.
It was filed with the court. Mm-hmm.
And we discussed this issue where, for all intents and purposes, under the stalking injunction statute probably would have been more appropriate.
But he didn't file that.
I understand, Your Honor. But that's not.
That's what was served on Mr. Zimmerman.
Correct, Your Honor. What I will point out, though, Your Honor, is that even under the repeat violence statute, Mr. Warren's position that we have met our burden in this case. We have presented substantial evidence. What's not in dispute in this case is over 185 communications were sent over a 9-day period. There was threats of bodily harm. He knew information about Mr. Warren as far as where he was traveling at that time. There was no legitimate purpose in that. And clearly, under the repeat violence statute, there would arguably have to be 2 issues of repeat conduct. However you look at this, it is repeat conduct. You got 185 messages over a 9-day period. So,
well, you're not saying that there's any violence here. Well, there hasn't been any testimony of violence, acts of violence. You're talking about the harassment part of repeat, correct?
Correct, Your Honor. Repeat and stalking. And
okay,
there have been courts that have. There's a split in authority on whether or not stalking
Yes,
or
but we are
harassment.
in the fifth.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
So I just want to make the record clear on this case that whether it needs to be arguably a set of 4, because to be repeat you have to have 2. We go way beyond that on this case, Your Honor. I don't think that becomes an issue. When we talk about a credible threat, in this case, a verbal or nonverbal threat or combination of the two, including threats delivered by electronic communication, are implied by a pattern of conduct which places the person who is the target of the threat in reasonable fear for his or her safety or the safety of his or her family members or individuals closely associated with the person, and which is being made with the apparent ability to carry out the threat to cause such harm. It is not necessary to prove that the person making the threat had the intent to actually carry out the threat. The present incarceration of the person making the threat is not a bar to prosecution under this section.
Who are you reading?
I'm reading Florida Statute 784-048, 2017, which has all the different types of definitions that we're discussing today on stalking. Because stalking still can be pled, Your Honor. It is still an act of violence under the traditional repeat violence statute. They list stalking as one of the types of violence. Violence means any assault, aggravated assault, and this is under 784-046, 2017, means any assault, aggravated assault, battery, aggravated battery, sexual assault, sexual battery, stalking, aggravated stalking. And what we're telling the court here is that's what we have here. We have stalking and we have aggravated stalking, Your Honor.
The question is do you have one incident of stalking? And do you need more than one in order to file under the repeat violence?
Your Honor, we would argue at a bare minimum you would have 3 instances of stalking.
3 incidents? Okay.
One would be the voicemails.
The what?
The voicemails.
Okay.
The emails. And the text messages. And these are all broken up in distinct different periods of time, Your Honor. And when the court
What
said...
were the distinct different periods of time? I heard a period of time between December 16th and December 23rd.
That was the totality of the period, but it was sent with a differentiation on means of communication, time, and since it's electronic, we don't have a place argument that we can make one way or the other. But it would be the same. 9 days is separate days. It's separate manners in which he harassed him. Some were direct threats. Some were slander. Some were arguably threatening him to stop doing his own work.
Do verbal threats without overt actions constitute this type of violence? It's because the case law is replete in instances where it doesn't. Bad conduct, foul language, even threats to do harm without any overt action does not constitute violence according to the injunction law that we have, especially within the Fifth. I'm looking at, this is what I'm looking at, Mr. President. I'm looking at one incident of harassment. And when we are, there you're exactly right. There's a split in our appellate courts between the First and the Fifth. The Fifth deems that in order to have repeat violence, you have to have separate incidences of stalking. And stalking itself is a repeated act of harassment. Repeated. That's what constitutes one act of stalking. Here today, there's been evidence that the respondent has contacted Mr. Zimmerman. It's unrefuted evidence because the respondent's not here, 185 times via voicemail, email, text messages in a 9-day period. I don't hear none of that testimony has been, other than very bizarre testimony about, not your testimony is bizarre, but the conduct is that sound effects, agitation, veiled threats. But does that constitute an overt act? I don't believe that the petitioner has met his burden when it comes to repeat violence. Not out of the 5th. You've, at best, alleged one incident of stalking during this period of time. But you haven't met the standard of 2 acts of repeat violence. And therefore, I'm going to deny the petition. All right?
Thank you.
Thank you. And Shasaya Howard. They're both absent. I'm going to go ahead and dismiss that petition. Romina Delamovich versus Cody Lewis.